Hello everyone, welcome you all in our YouTube channel Learning Radiology. Then start our study topic. Today we will discuss on the topic grid. Grid full form or grid also called as a graphical retrieval information display. Grid used in X-ray or radiography. Grid is you can say that the grid is a device which is used for the remove or absorb scatter radiation. It was invented by Dr. Gustav Buck in 1913. We all know that scatter radiation is very harmful for a patient and a technologist also, and decrease the image quality. Grid cutoff are the loss of primary radiation called as a grid cutoff. Grid principle grid is mainly composed of a large number of lead strip lead strip are separated from each other by some interspace material which is penetrated by X-rays, and in a lead strip every lead strip are separated by each other by each other. Grid is placed between patient and film. Mainly in case of X-ray grid is placed below the patient couch or X-ray table. A primary beam is able to pass through the translucent space in a grid, while scatter radiation, which deviates in direction from primary radiation, tends to strike the lead element and it absorbs before it reaches to the film. Grid is introduced in 1930 by Gustav Bucky. Bucky was introduced stationary grid. In case of modern grid, we use 0.505 mm width, and lead strip are individually separated by a aluminium or a plastic material which is 0.33 mm wide. Loss of primary radiation which reaching the film due to improper positioning called as a grid cutoff. There are a grid diagram which show that there is a tube angle or a tube anode or X-ray tube called as X-ray tube, and radiation emit from a X-ray tube called primary radiation. This is a patient, and below the patient this is a grid, and below the grid this is a film, and this dots line shows a scatter radiation which scatter from a patient. And these are lead strips used in grid. Grid is mainly composed of a high X-ray transmitting material and absorbing material which align separately and which align alternatively and regularly. Transmitting material example like aluminum strips, organic compounds. Absorbing material examples are like leads. For transmitting material we use organic compound or aluminum strips, and for absorbing material we use lead strips. They have a parameter, a grid ratio. A formula for grid ratio is R is equal to H upon D. R is equal to grid ratio, and H is height of the lead strip, and D is the distance between them, the one lead strip and other lead strip, and H is the height of the lead strip, and grid ratio is 4:1 to 16:1. A grid frequency, a number of lead strip per centimeter called grid frequency. There are 5 types of grid called as linear grid, focused grid, moving grid, parallel grid, and cross grid. In case of linear grid, lead strips are arranged in a parallel to each other, and it's allowed to angle the X-ray tube along the length of the grid without the loss of primary radiation from grid cutoff. In case of cross grid are lead strips are arranged superimposed linear grid, or say that one lead strip and other lead strip. Lead strips are arranged in a horizontal and vertical to each other. and grid ratio equal to the sum of ratio of two linear grid. But in cross grid cannot be used with oblique technique. For oblique technique we can't use cross grid. In case of focus grid mainly focus in use of focus grid, it's help to angulate it slightly so they focus in a space either linear or crossed. Linear focus grid are converge at a line called a convergent line, and cross focus grid converge at a point called convergent point. Means convergent line are those lines where linear focus grid converge a line, and crossed focus grid converge at a point called convergent point. This is example for a cross focused grid. In case of parallel grid, all lead strip are arranged in a parallel to equal when viewed from a cross section. Parallel grid are mainly used in a fluoroscopy spot film devices, and line per is equal to number of lead strip per inch of a grid called line per inch. Moving grid are those grid which move to blur out the shadow that cast by the lead strip. They eliminate the grid lines from the film, but it's very costly, subject to failure, may vibrate during the X-ray table, and increase the patient radiation dose. Thank you. Comment on this video, like the video, and subscribe the channel. Okay, thank you.